So we will start, and I would like to introduce Sébastien Bellin, who is a professor at the University of Montreal in the Department of Administration and Fondement. All the basics in education. How's that? He has his research is on measurement and evaluation, plagiarism, and evaluation of learning in different programs in arts and post-secondary programs. So, Sébastien, without further ado, it's your place.
Thank you, Martine. First of all, guys, it's pretty nice to be with you. As you will understand, I have a strong French accent, so if something is not quite clear, just let me repeat, and I just want to be very clear with you about my presentation today. So I will share the screen. I presume you guys see my presentation, yeah? Okay. So this is a presentation. It's based on research I had with colleagues from UCO and from different universities in Quebec. It's about intentional plagiarism. So here we take as a department, as a departure point, the idea of multidisciplinarity of plagiarism. So we use different point of view to try to explain plagiarism, and here I will focus on the economic point of view today. So the idea is just to test a specific, very well-known hypothesis called the risk-adverse hypothesis, where I think can be interesting to explain, I think, the behavior of the majority of students in education. Note that what I will present you today is maybe not able to or easy to be applied to students in the STEM fields, but I think there is some interesting tips I will present you today. So as I already told you, here it's the idea of studying the academic integrity in multidisciplinarity. I think is interesting because we have many author or thinker told us interesting things and ideas about intentional plagiarism. For example, philosophers told us interesting stuff, as well as ethologists or criminologists. So I think that using like not a very specific point of view, but a multidisciplinary point of view is very interesting to understand our main topic of research in the PUPP community. So, for example, Immanuel Kant used the notion of universality, which is that if, for example, you do something that cannot be generalized for everyone, it's probably a problem. And this idea can be interesting to understand intentional plagiarism. For example, if many students or all students plagiarize systematically, so this can be a problem because there is no learning development or critical thinking we have in the schoolwork. So there is some interesting ideas that we can use to understand much more topics such as intentional plagiarism. John Rawls, for example, the great philosopher in Harvard, so he worked a lot about social justice, and in the book A Theory of Justice, so you understand that when you cheat on some public goods, it's not good for the community who share some specific resources. So this is not a kind of very good behavior or way to act in society. And this can be interesting to help us understand that plagiarism is, for sure, it's an individual act, but this can be also a social act that can have impact on the community and the quality of the diploma. So, so the philosopher help us to understand, for example, how plagiarism, intentional plagiarism, can be a social, but also a social act. And some ethicists told us very interesting things for us, such as it's possible to cheat in a desirable context. So for example, if you cheat and this is have a good or pursuit for social benefit, so it can be interesting in specific context to cheat. So these kind of arguments are used also by criminologists. I will talk about this in a few minutes. And to explain us that, you know, plagiarism is maybe more complex than what we can think. So the philosophical lens to understand intentional plagiarism can help us understand much more about this complex concept. So here is, because we are all the community together today, it's a very interesting paper by Joel Hubick. He was at the KU Leuven in Belgium, and it's a philosophical response to plagiarism. So he basically tell us that plagiarism is like a false educational participation. So if you want to participate clearly and correctly to education, so we need to fight against plagiarism. And there is a lot of argument based on philosophers there that can help understand how it's possible to plagiarize, but and this is bad to plagiarize, but sometimes it's interesting to have some nuance in the way we conceive intentional and unintentional plagiarism. Ethologists also, so no, here it's about criminologists. So Freiberger and colleagues discovered that severe sanctions in criminology have no significant impact on the likelihood of cheating. So this is interesting because it's all about the question of sanctions. So how did we have to deal with sanctions? And criminologists tell us that sometimes using very severe sanctions don't have a very good impact. So these studies shows that if you have a certainty of sanctions, yes, for sure, you can have a moderate influence of cheating behavior, but this is maybe not a good idea. And this paper gives us interesting insight about how we can administratively impose sanction or not. So psychologists had studied extensively plagiarism, and they shows us and learn us a lot of things. For example, there is we plagiarize because it's a way to get ahead. We plagiarize because this is a way to save times. It can be a social behavior. Plagiarism is a result of some pressure from parental pressure. It can be pressure from the teacher, from the peers. We plagiarize because this is an accept normative behavior. So there is a lot of reason. Also, the psychologist shows us that men in general needs to be more prone to cheat or plagiarize than people who declare themselves as a female or woman. So there is a lot of stuff that comes from psychology that can help us to understand intentional plagiarism. And also, we can go in some STEM disciplines like ethology. So ethology is the study of human behavior and society from biological perspectives. And there's a lot of interesting models to help us understand what is the idea of intentional plagiarism. For example, Charles Worth formulated a predictive model where he shows that if we need to have access to a rare resource, scarce resource, so there is some strategy, and cheating is one of this interesting strategy. And here he just highlight three primary or main factors. So the social connection between the people. So it shows us that intentional plagiarism or cheating can be something social. The amount of abundance or not of the resource. So you understand here the resource can be go to a very difficult studying program, and the risk to be caught. So the idea of risk is very important because I will focus mainly on this topic here today by using another lens. So my focus will be today on the economical lens. So as I already told you, there is many point of view or lens or theory that can be used to understand the intentional plagiarism. So I told you some information about philosophy, ethology, criminology, psychology. And today, I will focus on the economic point of view to study the intentional plagiarism. A good departure point is the well-known book from John von Neumann and Morgenstern, Theory of Game and Economic Behavior, because this is where they really put the basic of what is taking a decision taking, and what is the basis of a rational decision making. So my personal interest here was to see if people are rational when they try to plagiarize. I will not completely answer these questions, but I think it's important because if people are rational, we will not act with them the same way that if they are not rational. So my hypothesis here today is, yes, in intentional plagiarism, to a certain extent, we are dealing with rational decision making. And just a small parenthesis is today, Mr. von Neumann, there is a biography that was published this year by von Neumann, and it is very interesting. So for the people who want to learn more about this man, he was probably one of the most important thinker of the 20th century. So I close my parenthesis, but it's quite interesting for those who like history of philosophy or philosophy of science. So how does it work to use the idea of expect utility to study plagiarism? So here, the idea is that we act as rational people. So there is some axioms. I will not show you today the axioms, but it's just here the idea to show you how expect utility works in the presence of intentional plagiarism. So imagine, for example, that you have an homework. So you have to work at the college or university and produce an homework. You have two choices. So plagiarize at the homework or do clearly the homework. And there, in the state of mind of the work of Morgenstern and von Neumann, so the person will try to predict what will be the grade they want to do or they need to have according to different decision-making choice. For example, if the person wants to plagiarize, so we know from some research that people perceive the chance of getting caught plagiarizing very small. So here, a person can, for example, predict that there is only a 5% chance of getting caught if we plagiarize at the homework. And then for every grade, the person can just predict or choose a percentage of chance of having this specific grade. For example, in the Quebec University, a grade of A have a value of 4 in 4.33. A grade of B have a value of 3, a grade of C a value of 2, a grade of D have a value of 1, and EF is like failing, so your grade have a value of 0. And if I plagiarize, so for example, a person can just predict having 20% of chance of having a A, which is an excellent grade. Can have 40%, for example, of having a B, which is a very good grade, 30% of having a C, which is a good grade, and so on. So here, if you sum up all the percentage, you will have 100%. And this is very important because this is the way in expect utility we will compute the utility of having a specific choice. If, for example, I do not decide to plagiarize intentionally to a homework, so here you see that we don't have the choice of plagiarizing, for sure. So here, if the person don't plagiarize, so he or she conceive himself as with less ability, so the chance of having a A, which account for a value of 4, is just 5% in comparison of 20% if he plagiarized. For a B, it's 15% of having a B in comparison of 40% of having a B if the person plagiarized. C, 45%, 30% if he plagiarized, 30% of having a D, and so on. And again, if I sum up all the percentage here, I will have 100%. So this is just to show you how people make decisions. So these decisions are basically subjective decisions. And expect utility can be used to choose if it's a better idea based on the utility to plagiarize or not. So the computation is quite simple, and this is the basic idea we show in the book of Von Neumann and Morgenstern. So for example, if I go to the left side of the computation, so with plagiarism, the right side is without plagiarism. So I will just finally multiply the value of the grade and the probability, which is a proportion here. So it's the same value, but in other metrics. And this will gives us a number. So for example, the 5% chance of getting caught. So I don't have any value with this. So it's 0. So A is equal to 4. So if with plagiarizing, I predict that I have 20% chance of having an A. So this is 4 multiplied by 0.2, which is 20%, but in proportion, plus the value of B multiplied by 0.4, 40%, plus the value of 2, a C, multiplied by 0.3, and so on. And when I multiply all the plagiarized homework here, it gives us my expect utility of plagiarism of 3.64. And when I do the same work, so the same calculation with not plagiarizing, but doing the homework by myself, so here I multiply the grade of A by 0.05, 5%, the grades of B by 15%, the grade of C by 45%. I have, when I sum up all this, 2.85. And as we see, in accordance with the utility theory, so it's better here, it's more rational in the economic point of view to plagiarize because the expect utility is of 3.64. And this is the way basically the theory of expect utility in economics works in decision making. So there is very, very few research on the topic of plagiarism and economics. So this is an example. They use the idea of expect utility, and they explain that plagiarism is motivated partly by two main characteristics. A lack of time. So we plagiarize because we want for some time saving, and because we are dishonest. So this is the two basic characteristics. But there is not a lot of work here. And as you can understand, this is a theory. So this is not related and applicable to all the cases. For example, people in psychology critiques the expect utility, but this can give us some interesting milestone to understand intentional plagiarism. In 1979, two Israeli researchers published a very, very important paper in experimental psychology and economics. This is the economic Nobel Prize of, I think, 2002 or 2003. This is what we call the prospect theory. So this is a theory that critiques the expect utility, but there is a lot of things in common between this utility. And one important thing is that in presence of values when we add some values to something, for example, I'm going to a casino and I wish to play and play and play, or for example, I want to pay more for an insurance. So we see that people in general have a risk aversion. So this is a specific theory that shows that in presence of more and more and more gain, so what we call the marginal analysis of gain, so people will not always have an exponential or linear relation to having more and more of something. So there is an optimal values, and just after, people just don't want more of these specific things. So there is some risk aversion in presence of money, for example, or potential gains that explain how we behave. And this is quite interesting because this theory, the prospect theory, the theory of risk aversion, is among one of the most interesting and most generalized theory we have in social science. And when I see and I read about this, I was, there is probably interesting stuff that can be learned from there to understand much more intentional plagiarism. And this is why I use both the conceptual idea of expect utility and the conceptual idea of prospect theory to focus specifically on the idea of risk aversion. So my hypothesis here is that people who plagiarize are generally risk adverse instead of risk seekers, if I can talk like this. Yes, just before going further, I read a very interesting paper where they analyze the idea of risk aversion, but from the point of view of biology. And Zhang and colleagues write these very interesting things. Risk aversion is one of the most widely observed behavior in the animal kingdom. Hence, it must confer certain evolutionary advantage. So because I am in the context of multidisciplinarity here to understand intentional plagiarism, I think there is something interesting here, and this is why I work to collect some data about this. So the methodology of my research. So this is a tree data collection from 2016 to 2023. So 2016, 2018, 2023, with only French-speaking undergraduate students in the province of Quebec in Canada. So I cannot generalize on my result. My results are really specific to a very concrete geography. So this is just some exploratory results. What I've done is just to create a cluster of questions where I test how people will behave with different information about the grades and about the chance of being caught. For example, so one of the cluster of questions was, for example, you anticipate getting grade D in your final assignment. Would you plagiarize in order to get a D plus if you have 5% of chance of being caught by your professor? Yes or not? And I move the parameter of this question. For example, if you anticipate getting D, if you plagiarize to get C minus, so and you have 10% of chance of being caught, will you plagiarize? And then will you plagiarize to get C if you have 15% of getting caught? Yes or no? If you have C plus and have 30% of getting caught. So I use this cluster and I change the parameter of the questions. So the departure point here is D, but I have another cluster of questions where the departure point was C, another one where the departure point was B. And my idea was just to see if I rise the grades, how the people will behave in the point of view of taking some risk, to see if they are risk adverse or not. So here are my results. So first of all, who answers my questions? So I have a sample size of 171 in 2016, 552 in 2018, and 116 in 2023. So the proportion of people between 21 and 23 years old, don't forget it, according to Student in Education in Quebec, was between 41% and 47%, and there is not a statistical difference between the three. For those who have maybe question about the not available here, it's because I test the chi-square test with simulation design. So this is why I don't use tables with critical values here. And the proportion of people declared as women was between 88% and 93% here. So, and this is, again, there is no statistical difference. So here the idea was just to show you first that the different cohort, the different people that answers in 2016, 18, and 23, the same question were basically almost the same. So mainly women, student indication, and the proportion of age was all the same in the different groups. Then I finally goes where I want to be today. How do people conceive themselves? So do people conceive themselves as risk taker or not? So I asked the question, I am a person who likes to take risks in life. How much do you agree with this statement? And the student who answered, I just asked the question in 2016 and 2023. So you will see that I have some difference here. So you see that people in 2016, 60%, and in 2023, 67% declare themselves like they don't want to take risk in life. So this is a first step that can show me that students in the education, maybe women, were not very prone to take risk in life. And I think this is interesting when we study intentional plagiarism. So then, here are the results for my cluster of questions. So you anticipate having a grade of D. So will you plagiarize if you have 5% of getting caught for having D plus, 10% of getting caught for having C minus, 15% of getting caught for having C, 20% of having of being caught for having C plus. So when it's A, it's the same thing. You anticipate having a grade of A, 5% of getting caught to have B plus, 10% of having of being caught for having A minus, and so on. So here are my results when the semester work account for 10% of the final grade. So as you can see, the proportion of no is in the y-axis. You have the answer on the x-axis. So basically, the first thing we see, people do not agree, so they answer no to plagiarize. So this is for student in education. My hypothesis is that students, for example, in STEMs will answer no in a smaller percentage, but for education, this is what I collect. So we see here in black, you have the results for 2016. In gray, you have the results for 2023. And we see that there is only one statistical difference here. And this is when the chance of getting caught is very small, 5%, and the departure point is grade D for having D plus. So people generally present results that shows that they are not very prone to take risks to cheat, so or to plagiarize intentionally here. So people in generally are really they don't want to plagiarize, and we see that when the percentage of chance to be caught rise, so the percentage of no also is a little bit higher. So this is some information interesting in accordance with the hypothesis of risk-adverse behavior. So what I can say to you is that we see also that the percentage of no was higher in 2016 in comparison of the percentage in 2023. And I don't have any explanation for this. So is it because of the pandemic? And we know that in some research, the pandemic have an impact that rise the case of intentional plagiarism. I don't have any specific information, but I see that in 2016, people were more prone to academic integrity. But now I cannot generalize this result. We need to dig deeper to understand much more of this. So here is the result when my work, the semester work, account for 10% of the final grade. When the semester works account for 40%, so the stakes are higher, how the people will behave. And as we can see, the people are more prone to plagiarize a little bit higher. The proportion of no are a little bit higher when the stakes are higher, 30% of the grade semester instead of 10% of the grade semester. But there is not a big deal. This is not a big difference. So here I have still the results for 2016 and 2023, and I had the result for a collect in 2018. So what we see first is that, again, the proportion of no, I will not plagiarize, or higher for 2016. again, we see that when the chance of being caught will be rise, so from 5% to 15 and 20%, we see that the percentage of no is higher for every case. We still see that the people in 2023, 2018 have lower proportion of no. And we have, again, very few statistical difference. And the statistical difference are generally when the chance of being caught are very low. And finally, the chance of having a higher grade is very low. For example, if I anticipate having a grade of D, so people to have C plus, there is no statistical difference here. So I have these very interesting results, and I think there is some things that can interest administrators and educators to help us understand the idea of intentional plagiarism. Then, this brings us to a theoretical model to falsify. So I put Mr. Karl Popper there. So my model, theoretically, so we have to test this with more empirical data, I think can looks like this. So this is a proposition. We need to talk about this, to falsify this. So here, you will see on the x-axis, so the percentage of anticipated increase of the final grade by plagiarizing. So I 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%, the value. And we see the curve. So for the work that accounts for 10% of the final grade, and the curve that accounts for 40% of the final grades. And what my model here suggests is that there is something that happens when the chance of being caught is very, very low. So people are ready to try to plagiarize intentionally when the chance of being caught is very, very low. This is why there is an optimal, and the curve is more flat when we anticipate having 10%, 15%, and 20%. And we see that the people are more prone or they are more numerous to try to plagiarize intentionally when the percentage of the final grade is higher, for 40% instead of 10%. So this model is like every model. So every model is wrong, but some are useful. And my question here today to you is if this model can be useful according to the tree collect of empirical data I tried to analyze in 2016, 2018, and 2023. So basically, the hypothesis of risk aversion seems plausible to explain the behavior of explain the behavior of education students when they try to plagiarize intentionally. So we observe that people who are most likely to plagiarize do it when the percentage attributed to the work is larger and when the risk of getting caught is low. Our result also suggests that students were slightly less likely to plagiarize in 2016 than 2018 and 23. And again here, it's not a causal effect. So I'm not able to say if this is clearly the case that can be generalized and this is because of the pandemic. I have no answer about this today. And I think we need to take this result with caution because some research suggests that the pandemic have an effect, but some others suggest that there is no effect of the pandemic. So we have to think much more and to study much more this specific element. And here, finally, our results are interesting for university administrator, educational professor. Here, I think that the use of sections for a very small percentage of people is very important. And here, I know that I have some very lovely colleagues, for example, hello, Martin, who think that it's maybe not relevant right now to have sanctions, but using an economic point of view to study intentional plagiarism, let me think that maybe we need this kind of strategy, but we need to focus much more on a very specific group of people. They are very tiny. they are maybe around in education 15%, 10%, where who they want to plagiarize, and they can seek some risk at the moment they plagiarize. And all of this gives us some information about the idea of risk adverse hypothesis, but also we see that people are rational, but I have to think about how rational are students when they plagiarize. So I need maybe in a further research to study much more what kind of rationality students have altogether. And I think I will also try to work on how people collaborate when they plagiarize. So, for example, it's if they are in a homework group homework, how they collaborate all together to plagiarize. I think there is some interesting insight here that can be related to the idea of risk and risk adverse hypothesis. So that was my very modest presentation, and I hope that that this can make rise some questions and some thoughts that we can all exchange all together. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sebastien. I'm going to open the floor. I think you should have left that presentation up because I want to go back to certain slides that I've noted. But is there anybody that wants to start off the round of questions for Sebastien? Vas-y, Michel.
Yes, Michel, thank you so much for your presentation, and the results are fantastic. Really, we are seeing almost the same in our survey. Yes, the first thing is the assumption of rationality. I think in social science and economics is a very strong assumption. It's very precise as well, because we know during the life it's very difficult. Agents take action because of the rationality, and this is. But yeah, you show us the fact of risk takers, and yeah, there is some rationality in that case. But I remember that there was a theory that maybe it can be contrasted with the rationality. Was the asymmetric information issue, and this may be explaining some of the results that you are obtaining. And the asymmetric information is based on the rules that the agents they don't know all the rules, and that's why rules when are very clear and maybe translated into the project of plagiarism. When you know the rules about plagiarism, you must be an agent that cannot take the risk to plagiarize. So maybe the asymmetric information is something that is behind some of the results that you are finding here. And how I would like to know how you can control this rationality and this assumption of because it's more related with institution. How agents know about the rules is more related with institutional theory, and how can you control this if it was possible in the questionnaire or not? But thank you. The results are fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michel. This is a great question. First of all, for those who don't know, the asymmetric information is it's a Nobel Prize. It's just to be crystal clear to everybody, there is no Nobel Prize basically in economics. So this is the national Swedish bank just gives a prize and they call it the Nobel Prize, but there is no economic Nobel Prize. The idea of asymmetric information is related to a paper. It's called The Market for Lemons. It's a guy called one of the authors. There were three authors. It's Joseph Stiglitz. He was a guy very famous in the United States and in the IMF. So basically, is that if you want to apply the economic market, you need to respect some hypotheses. One of the hypotheses is having a perfect information between the seller and the owners. And there, as we know, people don't have a perfect information. For example, if I go to buy a car, a used car, I will not know if this is a lemon or not. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Michel. The idea of asymmetric information is important. I don't focus on this specific elements here, but for sure it's interesting. If we ask, for example, the questions, do you know the information about the laws of against plagiarism in your university? And people don't know a lot. So there is, I think, for the major part, there is an asymmetric information between the rules and how people act in accordance with plagiarism. But it's maybe something interesting to investigate further. But I don't have nothing more to say about this.
Any other questions from anybody before I go into my list? Okay, if any questions come to mind, don't hesitate to interrupt me. First of all, Sébastien, you talk about risk aversion.
Yeah.
But is it a risk aversion or is it the risk-taking tolerance or the risk tolerance?
It's not the same thing in economics. The risk aversion is a specific definition, and I use this definition. And if I understand, I'm not an economist, Martin. I have a bachelor degree and a master degree in economy, but I'm not in economics since 15 years. The tolerance is sometimes synonymous of risk adverse, but sometimes it's not the same definition. So here I don't make the difference here in the way I want to talk to you today. So for me, that was the same thing, but I have to dig more closely in how we define methodologically the difference between those ones. But I'm not sure there is an unanimous difference between these two concepts.
It seems to me when you're presenting your data, you're presenting in your column, it's the no column. So if it's the no column is, I'm not willing to take the risk.
Yep.
But then they're willing to take the risk. So is it tolerance? Because then it would be a yes column if maybe, they were willing. So that, anyways, that was one of the questions that I had.
It's a good question, Martin. I have to think about this, yes.
Because you formulate, and which is why it's surprising, you formulate your questions with the no, saying, no, I wouldn't do it. But at one point, when it's getting higher and higher, it becomes, yes, I'd be willing to do it. Yeah. So anyways, good. It's a question I'm wondering about. You mentioned at the end that you were going to look into possibly, and this is further research, but I'm giving you another idea for further research, because you said you'd look into groups, but groups variables are so large and so different. I'm not sure it would be very easy to look into the differences, but I think the types of risk people are willing to take would be a better idea to look at. For example, are you willing to take the risk when you're handing in a paper or when you're doing an exam?
Oh, yeah.
And so, for example, chances of being caught during an exam are much higher than they are when you're handing in a paper. So there are different types of plagiarism and cheating that you could use to go see what types of, I'm not sure if it would be types of risks or types of tasks during which they take risks, but that'd be really, really interesting to see. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that I wanted to make sure, that I wanted to mention. The other thing, when you talked about at the beginning, when you're in your theory presentation, you talked about risk aversion, and you mentioned that one of the reasons, and it just came into my mind, it was just too funny, I have to mention it, but you compared us to the animal kingdom, where the reason they stay alive is because they take risks or because they are careful of not taking risks. And so it'd be really interesting to see. And that's the human evolution. Were you willing to take risks before AI existed? And would you be willing to take risks now that AI exists? Because once AI was introduced, it's true. The chances of being caught are so much smaller. Will the risk aversion diminish because of this evolution? Another idea for future research. When you presented your data, why is it, do you think, what's your hypothesis that because it's women, they're in education, and you said they self-identify as 60 to 70%, 60 to 67% as not risk takers? What are the characteristics of your population? You didn't present that very much. That would make it not that they are not risk takers, because that will taint everything that you're going to present.
Yeah, this is a flaw of my research. We don't collect a lot of social economical variables, and it's difficult for me to explain. It's possible to relate the idea of risk taking, because we know, like, it's generalized that men are more risk taking than women. But other than this this very basic stuff, it's not possible for me to explain much more why I have this. And this is a clear limit of my study, clear limit, yeah.
But I think if you were to look into the characteristics of students that do take education programs and all that, you would have some type of explanation.
Yeah.
More conservative, more traditional students, more used to being top of the class students, and so on and so forth. And that would be an interesting way to explain your results, I think.
I wish to maybe share some thought about this, Martin. I talked with some colleagues in philosophy of education, and one of my hypotheses why maybe women are less prone to plagiarize than men, or students are less prone to plagiarize in education than plagiarize than to, for example, in STEMs, is that, for example, I think that people in education value more education than if you are, but I'm not sure. I search for some evidence of this, and I don't find something very, very strong about this. So I don't know if you think it can be interesting, or if you have some paper to suggest me that can explain why, for one part, women are less prone to plagiarize, or the other part, why people in education have lower percentage of plagiarizing intentionally behavior. I will be more than happy, but otherwise than this, I don't know.
Go see Sylvie Fontaine, and I think your name is on that paper. The paper by Sylvie Fontaine that we wrote 2-3 years ago, where she looked at cheating behaviors for women. They're not women, but for students in education, mostly women. We did talk about their characteristics.
Yeah.
So you can go check in there.
Cool.
I have two questions, but they're together. When you talked about Ibresu 2018, you said that he mentioned cheating in some context was understandable. Can you give us an example? Does he give examples?
Yes, for example, well, yeah, sure. For example, it's not related to his paper, but imagine, for example, you are during World War II. A Nazi asks you if there is somebody on your basement, and you cheat. You say no, but there's the case, yes. For the public good, it's better to cheat there. So this is, this is a very, very big statement, and this is maybe not a good example, but this is this kind of situation.
Okay.
For the specific case of plagiarism, here I just report on the philosophy part of my presentation that we know philosopher told us this interesting facts. I don't have any specific things or example in mind, but I think we need to read again more carefully philosophers to understand much more intentional plagiarism. Because there is, when I read about this, I understand that there is a lot of of things that are not covered by our literature. And one thing that I think is very interesting too is to put all together different theory and point of view to understand much more what we are doing. So,
I think you might find answers in this idea of culture of plagiarism, where it doesn't mean that it's necessarily more, doesn't mean that it's necessarily more acceptable, but it means that because other people are doing it, it means I can do it too.
yeah,
And so this idea could be there in that culture.
Yep.
And last but not least, I want to comment on the slide where my name was, because I will let you know that when I give workshops, one of the ways that I mentioned that does prevent plagiarism is when plagiarism cases are reported. And so I do believe one of the ways to prevent is to report and to sanction students, because they talk between themselves, and it means that they know they can get caught. And I agree with you. It's not irrelevant to give sanctions. We need to do that. There needs to be consequences to anybody's actions, and that includes students who plagiarize or cheat during their stay at universities. So we are in agreement 100% on that one.
Yeah. It's interesting because criminologists show that there is a lot of research in criminology where they show that the strong sanctions, not the perfect sanctions, you're 100% sure to have sanctions, don't have a very big effect. So this is a little bit in opposition with the economic literature, but I think our community need to write much more on the idea of sanctions. I think there is a very interesting stuff to do there. So
go see Irene Glendining. She talks a lot about sanctions.
Cool. I will be more than happy.
Does anybody else have any other questions for Sébastien? Well, Sébastien, I want to thank you. I really, really enjoyed your presentation this morning. And I think it's very, not only very interesting, but very valuable piece of research that you're doing. And I certainly encourage you to keep going, because I think we need to hear about it as much as we need to hear about prevention.
Yep. Yay. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you.
Goodbye.